All right, so now with our Pro Q2 from FabFilter, I can now select every single channel, and I want to add an instance of Q2 on every single track. This is something I'll do in the mixing phase or even in the production phase of the in-mix, which was a session we looked at earlier in this course. What I do is I grab every single track here. So I'm going to skip these groups. I'm going to go here. I'm going to grab every one of these, and we can just apply it all at once to make things easier. And I'll put an instance right at the top so I can use the Q2 to make any of my cuts and decisions like that that I know I'm going to need here in a moment. So let's just grab the effects, and now we'll go over here. And let's go down to our Q2, and it'll fire it up across every single channel. So give it a second just to do that. Okay, so now what I like doing, let's just deselect, is going through each stem. So I always start with my kick up here, of course. I don't roll my kick off much. This is going to be our starting point that I have for my default. So I'm going to leave my kick pretty much open. And why I start each one like this is because generally I'm going to be cutting all of my other stems. I'm going to be doing the pass here for my kick, my bass, maybe a touch of the snare. But a rule of thumb, you guys can see my default setting in Q2 is about 157, 160. And a majority of the time, I'm going to be going this way, making more cuts, subtractive EQing, rather than adding and boosting is the majority of the time what I'm going to be doing in the EQ mixing phase. So now to our snares here, I'm going to solo those together. And you guys can see 400 hertz has a lot of punch to that snare, so I'm going to actually do a touch of a dip there. And I don't need any information going on there. And now the snare 2 is going to need a slight cut here. We're going to go lighter with that. And we're just cutting that out really light. Now on the clap, that's going to be cut too. That, like the low end, I don't need much low end on my claps at all. I'm pretty much going until it's so thin that the sound is really not making a difference. And we can always check that in the mix too. When you're EQing, there's going to be times when you want to go solo like I'm doing, but there's also going to be a lot of guys that tell you, do your cuts with the music playing. Yes, I agree with that. I want you guys to go back and forth between soloing them and also doing your EQ, surgical EQ stuff with the track playing. But I like soloing it too, so I can really get down to what's going on. If there's an issue with something mix-wise, I usually find out in the EQ stage. So now the hi-hats, those are generally rolled off pretty far. And I'm just going to watch on the high end on those, bring these down a little bit. Now these have a good amount of mid-range information, these per kits. Let's check those out. So this is just going to give so much room to my chords, my bass, my kick. I like doing a touch harsher slope on these. There's a very minimal amount of information in the low end, but trust me, getting rid of it is going to be a lifesaver. There's no need to keep it because it's just going to add up with everything else. Looks like the rides are pretty much already pushed, but I'm just going to make sure those are good. Okay, so these toms, let's loop that section real quick. Those are definitely having some good low end. So let me bring this back and see how much lows those have. And let's actually freeze that. We can do right here so it holds it. So there's a good amount right here between about 300 and about what, 150, 80? Yeah, 100 and 300. I need to do a light dip, and I do want to cut these out. I'm going to do a slower slope. I don't want any of this in here. Now, toms, you do want low end. That gives punch, right? But we need to really find the thin line of when it collides with the kick. So let me put that on. And let me actually just move it over for the moment so I can hear it with the kick going. And I'm going to bring it back far enough where it disappears. So 150 is definitely too far. So where I had it as a good rule of thumb, 80 to 100 is really fitting right for that. Okay, so now the toms are fitting good. Now let's move on down here to our break perks. There's a good amount of low information in it. Let's get rid of it. Now, when I'm doing dips, I'm looking for anything that's really peaking. It's more of a visual thing. Trust your ears, too. There's going to be stuff that's popping out. This is where I'll use the headphone piece here. And I'm looking for harsh resonances that are standing out, or again, anything just too loud. Now, the kick 2 here, I'm not going to touch, so let's bring that back to its original state. Not going to touch that. The snap is probably going to be really light. You guys can see there's a lot there, so let's pinch that and tighten that up because that's going to be a harsh resonance. You can hear that right there. We don't want that. So that cleans that up. And as light as that is, it's going to clean things up in the mix. Now our build drum's probably going to have a lot of low. I want to make sure I wipe those out to bring the kick in. There's no need to have any of that low in there. Because that kick is giving the listener the perception that these build drums are fatter than they are or have more lower information than they actually have because you're pairing them together. You're stacking them. Okay, so those are feeling good. Let's move on now to the guitar part. And you guys can see every EQ for each one is slightly different. There's a rule of thumb with the rolling, the lows. A lot of the synths and stuff I roll highs, but let's check out the guitars now. It was already rolled off pretty good. So those are good to go. Not much done on the guitars. The keys might have more information on the low, I'm guessing. Just a touch in the mid-range here. And the reason I dip, guys, any song I'm doing, 2 to 5K, there's a lot of information from every stem. Think about how much is going on in your high and mid-range. Almost every one of the stems we have here, if not all, have something frequency-wise going on in here. So therefore, there's going to be so much stuff that collects in this area. So if you start dipping stems, even in your master channel, you'll find guys dip between 2 and 5K. You know, a slight bit. Doesn't have to be anything exaggerated down to -6. Depends on the track. But I'd say majority of the time when I'm working, I'm finding myself dipping this area, the frequency range, on numerous amount of stems. Let's check out this fill here. And we'll make that a little lighter. Okay, that's sounding good there. Now let's move down to our chord section. This is going to be a touch more of a precision on the EQing for each. So let's now check out this, the chord 1. Let's take off the support. Now my chords, I'm generally cutting between 2 and 500 hertz. 500 sometimes could be too much, making it a bit thin. So what I like to do is run it with the mid bass so I can hear how much information is going on in the mid range against my main chords. My support saw is going to be lighter. Therefore, I can roll it off more because I have mid bass and I have drop main saws being my mid range. Therefore, I can go more. This is going to make it have a less masked sound. It's still going to be stacked, but I'm not really hiding any sounds. So now doing all of this is simple cuts here. I do a high cut on my main saws, which is this one here, because there's going to be a lot of noise coming from those. And that's all going to add up with the effects and anything else I have going on there. So these cuts, now we'll let that sub bass really come through. And we have to just make sure that's not rolled off. Now we can hear it. So the main thing when we're doing these slight cuts, even though it's simple cuts, it's precise. We need to go one by one. Now again, I want to hear it in the mix. Right away, I'm hearing my kick and bass clean and clear. That is rule number one in mixing in my EQing. If those are hidden at this moment where we are, we have to go back. We have to understand what is clashing. So the reason why I go one by one is it makes it easier for me to understand which stem could be causing issues, which could be clashing or masking one by one. Compare them with each other like I did with main saw and mid bass. You'll be able to hear which one is clashing. Is there one hidden? So make sure you're doing that. Now we can go down here to our break synths. Let's check the high keys. And I'm cutting those because I have a re-space here that is really taking over down there that we're actually going to have to go back and bring the lows in. So we don't need anything here. We don't need the plucks having a lot going on down there. I do want the warm 200 range of the plucks. And I like the high transient of those 8th note plucks. Those are important. Now the pads we can roll off further. And now what I do is compare them with each one. Is one of them masking the other? And the pulse is a pretty light sound. Again, let's roll that further. So that has a pretty harsh resonance. Let's take that out. You guys can hear that whistle sound. Definitely don't need that. Make sure you guys are going one by one to find that. And there might be one right here too. Right? It's the slightest bit. But believe me, that adds up. When that resonant sound that's not working clashes with another one, that's when it's going to get havoc with the mix and a little messy. So with the pianos, I love the lows. So we need to compare this with the Reese, the low bass. And make sure our pianos are not feeling too thin against the Reese. The Reese, that bass is giving the perception to the listener that the chords have a warm low end. Realistically, they are rolled off perfectly that when they're paired together in the mix, you guys are getting a nice low end. You can see there's a good amount of information back here on the piano, which there usually is. Right around in here, none of that we need, so let's make sure we're taking that out. So now we make sure all of this is fitting good together. Okay, that's sounding good. Now the vocal chop, I don't even need to play. I know rule of thumb right away. Vocal chops, I'm going to 300. Now guys, when you're doing subtractive EQing, you're cutting. Therefore, that is a precise way of EQing. When you're adding, when you're going up and boosting, you guys could be adding phase, which is going to be adding more actual dB output to that sound. So when you guys are doing this, you're not actually causing phasing. You're subtracting. Nothing's going to happen to it as far as clashing with the other instrument because we're taking away. When you guys are adding, you can create phase issues. So keep in mind, a large amount, a higher percentage of the time, I am subtracting. Okay, same thing with pre-drop vocal over here. Probably cut this here. Definitely don't need much low end there. Okay, let's check out what we got over here. Another vocal that's going to come in really loud. We're going to cut that. And me subtracting a bit is actually pushing it back in the mix a nicer amount, being kind of putting it where it's supposed to be in the mix rather than really, really loud and bright. Everything doesn't need to be always bright. Now, the effects, I want to always look for if there's any impacts in here, they're going to be cut. But my effects, generally white noise and stuff, I'm 500 hertz and up. And as we go, there's going to be stuff like this, impact hit. That's we can kind of let come through. But this one with the more tonal risers and white noise, I don't need anything going on down there. So I'm going to be really light with that. And then again, let the low end from effects 2 come through. Okay, so now let's move forward on our next section. We've done our EQing. We can push forward here with going more into the mixing side.